How do we balance innovation and regulations? I see great innovation just getting stuck, not coming through, and we could probably benefit from it. Do we need regulation at all? Shouldn't we just take the brakes off and let the innovation engine run full tilt?
The wave of AI has been described as the fourth industrial revolution. Undoubtedly brought a lot of prosperity, but a huge lack of regulation. What kind of chaos can we expect to see?
If you move fast and break things in healthcare, actually you leave a lot of people hurt. We need to understand the problem better, recognize that every data set has strengths and weaknesses. What is sufficient to have enough confidence that we can bring it to market? Can we bring those technologies through earlier so that patients can benefit from them? How can we get real-time feedback and learning as we're going in a way that we've not really been used to doing?
Self-evolving AI, an agent that identifies its own issues.
That's going to be a big challenge, and we need to be thinking about that now. So how do we manage that? How we think about our role as a human in the loop. How meaningful is it? Awareness is massively increasing. The law, as ever, takes a while to catch up. Can we bit by bit construct that regulatory system of the future?
Today, I'm joined by Professor Alastair Denniston, one of the UK's leaders in artificial intelligence and digital health technologies. We're going to be tackling one of the biggest topics in AI, implementation, and how we can actually get these technologies off the ground and into the clinic. Thank you so much for joining me, Professor Denniston, today. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what your current roles are? Because you've got quite a few.
Yeah, so I'm a NHS ophthalmologist, so an eye specialist working as a consultant in University Hospitals Birmingham, a big acute NHS trust. Wearing that hat, I see patients with various forms of eye condition and involved in diagnosis and treatment and so on. But the reason you've asked me to come and talk to you today is not about that role so much, but more because of the work we do in artificial intelligence. And so one of the key roles I hold is leading a group that is focused on the evaluation and regulation of these technologies. So what we don't do is we don't particularly build AI technologies. We work with people who do, but we try and help people work out when these technologies are ready for use in their NHS. So when are they good enough?
This is a big question, a bit of a hot topic for the UK. I think the UK are traditionally seen as a bit more cautious, certainly than America, but also compared to other European countries. Do you think that we are currently striking the right balance between regulation and innovation? Yeah,
so it's a great question. I think we're certainly often seen as being a bit more cautious than the US, probably faster and more innovative than many European countries. And the regulatory system in Europe tends to be fairly cautious. It runs off something called the precautionary principle, very much, first do no harm, and concerned that whatever changes we make mustn't make any part of the system any worse for anyone. So whereas the UK is sort of looking at being a bit more kind of still regulating very, very carefully, but in a bit more of a risk proportionate way. So there is a slight difference there between the UK and Europe. But I think we're in an interesting position where we can actually move potentially faster than Europe. The fundamental question, though, that you're pointing to rightly is how do we balance innovation and regulation? So I'd first say, well, do we need regulation at all? What would happen if we just made the case and say, well, look, we want new technologies coming through to our patients. We know that there are really amazing inventors and innovators creating things that could do a lot of good. Shouldn't we just take the brakes off and let the innovation engine run full tilt? And you do see that happening. And the sort of classic Silicon Valley mantra of move fast and break things really speaks to that. The thing about healthcare is it's safety critical. So if you move fast and break things in healthcare, actually you leave a lot of people hurt and potentially worse. So we do need some safeguards that work across the system to try and make sure that we get the the best of new inventions, new innovations, new technologies coming through, but we get them when they're ready, when they're kind of ready for routine use. Sometimes we get people bringing us stuff that is at what we think of as proof of concept stage. So it works really well in a carefully controlled environment, being used by the people who have kind of built it and who know exactly how to use it. But what I'm interested in is how do you get that from that level where it works under perfect environment by its original creators to something where really it can be used widespread across the NHS safely. There's a famous phrase about Lionel Messi and a really fantastic footballer, and yes, but could he do it on a wet Tuesday afternoon in Stoke? And it's slightly the same. Is can these technologies manage in like a busy A&E in Basingstoke on a Friday afternoon?
And I think a big component of that is making sure that they work across populations. Because the UK has a very diverse population. And if you have an AI that's trained for one particular group, or it's trained with a bit of a limited data set, then trying to generalize that system to a hospital working with this diverse population, it's going to fall flat for some people, but not others. Is that one of the biggest challenges that regulation has faced? And if so, how are we making sure that AI systems are going to perform equally well for everybody in the UK?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. There's quite a lot to cover there, but you're absolutely right. There's a fundamental problem here. And if you think about where we want to get to, we want to get to where it's not just working for some people, but it's working for everyone. And that we also know how well it works in different people groups. So it has to work at least up to a safe level. But the nature of these technologies, because they're trained on data, as you rightly point out, they will tend to perform best on people who look like, not necessarily physically like, but who match, if you like, the training data. One of the terms we use for this is health data poverty, the idea that actually there are some people who lose out because they aren't represented in the data sets being used for discovery, used for building AI technologies. And so that our team have done a lot of work in this space, and a really great researcher, Associate Professor Xiao Lu, led a lot of work in this, mapping data sets across the world, looking at for particular conditions that are, or uses that are often used for AI, how representative these data sets are. And one specific initiative that came out of that was something called Standing Together, where they brought people from many countries around the world, more than 50 different countries, to agree a set of sort of transparency standards. So it wasn't saying you need to always create a perfect data set with everyone represented, because that's impossible. But it was more about saying, well, let's recognize that every data set has strengths and weaknesses. Every data set has a population represented there in a particular way. So make sure that when you create a data set, you also report who's in it, how they're represented. And then if we have that information, then we can build technologies that recognize the data that is involved in the training and testing, and we know the strengths and limitations of that technology that's built and that might be used, for example, in the NHS, as to how well it matches what's sometimes called the target population, based on the training data. So as we think about how these technologies work in different people groups and different settings, it's not just about the training data, but the training data is a very powerful predictor of how it will perform. And it's certainly something that we would want to test. We'd want to know really with a high degree of certainty that a technology coming into the NHS has at least been tested on data from people similar to the NHS population.
Building on this idea, I think one particular group that are frequently neglected by AI is actually children, which I wasn't kind of expecting, but children are often not represented in training data sets, obviously because they're not as involved in clinical trials, probably for good reason.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, I think a lot of AI systems, that it's not clear whether they are validated and safe to use in children. And I think even if they are labeled as safe to use in children, it's not stringently tested for. Is the governmental stance now kind of amping up the amount of criteria that the AI has to meet in order to classify as being safe to use in these specific populations? Like, have you responded to this particular issue?
Yeah.
Or are you responding to similar issues in other groups?
As the sort of regulatory law stands, there's phrasing around safety, but there's not really an emphasis on safety across all groups. It's just sort of assumed, and it's because it was designed for medical devices where you didn't expect there to be a big difference in performance according to, as you say, whether children or adults or sex or age or ethnicity. There's guidance coming out from various regulators, and including regulators in the UK and the NHS itself, really emphasizing the importance of looking at inclusivity of these devices. There was a big report specifically around medical device equity from Dame Margaret Whitehead just a couple of years ago. So I think awareness is massively increasing. The law, as ever, takes a while to catch up. But as people become more aware and there's more guidance around this, there has been a lot more work. Part of this extra work is around trying to actually map the extent of the problem. So there are kind of many research groups around the country that work in this space. If I think of children, I think of Susie Shalman-Dean's, Professor Shalman-Dean's work at Great Ormond Street, doing really nice work from the radiology side and in terms of pediatric AI. And then there's many groups looking at effects of ethnicity and how AI technologies perform and sometimes underperform. So I think we're getting there, but we need to understand the problem better. And then we really do need to be starting to test in a systematic way how these technologies perform, as I say, to make sure that they're ready for the huge diversity of the NHS population.
Yeah.
One of the specific challenges, though, as well, is it may not be enough to just think of these sort of characteristics on a single characteristic basis. So what you can sometimes have is that something seems to perform well across, say, different age groups. But if you look at the intersectional level, so where, for example, you see, say, age intersecting with sex, intersecting with ethnicity, maybe even part of the country or level of deprivation, you might suddenly find there are kind of a combination of risk factors that mean that the AI performance suddenly drops off a cliff.
Right.
And so one of the challenges, whether I speak as a kind of NHS clinician or wearing a regulator hat, is, how granular do we need to go? What's our level of testing? Is it enough to look at these kind of broad buckets? Do we need to have some really smart way, maybe machine learning itself, to actually look at clusters of our potential failure modes where a particular combination of circumstances might lead to this technology being dangerous in this group of people?
Yes.
But that's a new challenge that regulators haven't had to face before.
Interesting. The wave of AI has been described as the fourth industrial revolution.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously, during that industrial revolution, there was a lot of sickness and, undoubtedly brought a lot of prosperity.
Yeah.
But there was chaos and a lot of, a huge lack of regulation, which is kind of characteristic of any changing point in time. If this is the fourth industrial revolution, what kind of chaos can we expect to see? I don't think we're going to see as much plague. But what challenges are we going to face?
I think two things happen when a new technology comes through. One is it already clearly within, is it clearly captured within existing regulatory system? And if it sort of hits that funnel and comes in and people say, yeah, well, this is regulated under this framework, it has somewhere to go, but it can get stuck in that machine because essentially it comes in. So there's a sort of entry point that says, if we take AI in healthcare, if it qualifies as a medical device, then it goes into this medical device regulatory framework, and there's a subset within that, software as a medical device, and we go, it goes into this box. But that machine wasn't really designed for this technology. So what can happen is it gets stuck in that machine. So some bits may be very appropriately regulated, and we, the regulatory machine can spit out an answer saying, yes, you tick these boxes. But there may be aspects of that technology where the machine just goes, I don't know what to do with this. And at that point, and I'm not speaking specifically for the UK, I'm just in general terms, the regulatory machine has a decision whether either it just goes too difficult and it gets stuck and it doesn't pass, it just keeps going back to the beginning, or there's just delays and because it doesn't compute, or goes, well, we don't really understand this, but it looks good enough, so it comes through anyway. Neither of which is ideal. We don't want to be slowing down good technologies, but we don't really want to be just waving stuff through because we don't understand it. So that's one risk. The other thing that can happen, and we see this a bit with the application of general purpose technologies such as the large language models, famously ChatGPT, is you might get a technology that can be used in healthcare but doesn't really fit the box of existing regulations in healthcare. And so then you get those technologies that simply bypass the existing regulatory system, potentially. And so you could get these technologies like people starting to use ChatGPT in a healthcare context, professionals using it.
Yeah.
And people go, well, isn't this regulated? And maybe the general public would assume it is, but because it hasn't quite fitted into any of those kind of entry points, it's a bit like, well, nobody's quite sure whose job it is, and it's not necessarily that anybody's doing anything wrong. It's just the system isn't made for these technologies.
Sure.
So I see both these things happening at the moment. I see examples where, a bit like your point about previous industrial revolutions, the technology is just here, it's being used, and we're just finding out what happens, and it's not really being regulated appropriately for the context. I also see great innovation coming through and just getting stuck and not coming through, and we could probably benefit from it, but the existing regulatory system just doesn't really quite know how to process it. And then there are some technologies that are managing to navigate the existing system, but that can be still a slower process than I'd like it to be.
And AI is supposed to speed up everything massively. I think consistently we're seeing headlines of new technologies that could find new drugs in just days, whereas traditionally it's going to take 10 years.
Yes.
Is regulation what's holding back from these technologies being already out there and being able to find, for example, drugs in such shorter time frames? Is it just regulation that's holding us back now?
There are quite a few different things in that question. So you're quite right. There is a massive gap between the headlines and our experience on a day-to-day basis. And again, I would say that if you think about the difference between, say, AI as you experience it as in your daily life, on your smartphone, maybe on your kind of Spotify playlist or whatever, and you go, well, why doesn't my experience of AI in healthcare look like that? Again, I would point to the fact that it's healthcare is a safety critical industry. So that's partly then that you've got that kind of regulatory control on it, but it's also that I think innovators themselves are just a bit more responsible and going, yeah, we're happy to make this claim of what it could do, but we know we're not ready for prime time yet. We know that we need to make sure that it's reliable and works every day, whoever's using it. So if we take the drug discovery example, there's been amazing advances there, and you're absolutely right. We're being able to predict like binding patterns. We're being able to predict potential drugs much earlier. We're being able to predict their safety profile. So actually, a lot of the reason why potentially useful therapeutics and drugs don't come through is we find something that has an effect, whether it's like killing cancer cells, and it can go through quite far down the development process before we discover actually it's got really bad side effects. So however good it is at doing what we want it to do, actually its side effects are too great that no person would ever want to take it. So these are all things that AI is now helping us with. We can choose smarter drugs that are more likely to be successful in humans. But you still need to do the hard work of taking a drug candidate all the way through classic clinical trials. You can't just say, well, the AI says it's going to work in humans, so therefore we'll start, manufacturing it and selling it and make it available in the NHS. You have to then still do a series of increasing size clinical trials, which tell you more information to the point where you're really confident that it has the effect you want. It doesn't have side effects that are too serious, and it's safe for use in the general population. So essentially, we're shortening some parts of that development pipeline, but other bits stay the same, which is why you're still seeing a lag despite the excitement. Right. And we see the same thing with AI diagnostics. So it's a very different area, but it's relatively easy to publish a scientific paper and have a lot of kind of media excitement around, new diagnosis for Alzheimer's or new diagnostic or screening tool for breast cancer. What's much harder is to then demonstrate that it's at least as good as our current human systems. And ideally, you want it to be better than human, and more cost effective than human, and of course acceptable to patients as well. And all of that takes time.
I suppose interlinked with that is the implementation gap.
Yeah.
It's about 80 to 85% of AI projects fail before they even get to market. Why do you think that is? Is that purely because they're not being trained thoroughly enough?
It's still a better ratio than drug development. So drugs, it's like more than 99% fail before you get to market. So I think it's not uncommon with kind of idea generation. They're always, we generate lots of ideas or potentials. And I think we have to accept that a smaller portion are demonstrated to be useful and people want them. But you're right, we always want that process to be as efficient as possible, because there is a lot of money wasted in that 90% that don't come through. So I think there are a number of factors where we could improve things. I think the first thing is we should be better at demand signaling, in the sense of so again, putting my NHS hat back on, I should be better at saying, these are the tools we need in order to deliver really great patient care and actually improve the lives of patients, whether it's faster diagnostics, faster treatments, fewer side effects, whatever it may be. That's something that, is something that I think the health community with patients and with the health system could be better at doing. So, right, these are our priority conditions. These are what we need for each of these conditions to help us. So again, if we were looking at national screening level, we might say, well, we've got a big problem with diabetes and the way it can affect people's eyes, and so we want to try and make their annual eye screening, that if you have diabetes and you're over the age of 12, you have to have that done once a year. People don't really like the drops coming up and having that done. Is a way we can make AI and manage that process more efficiently, and maybe having more targeted screening, so you're either more frequent or less frequent according to need, using AI to analyze the images and potentially doing that more reliably than humans and faster, and so on. So that might be an area that we say, right, we're going to prioritize that. Or we might say, in terms of cancer diagnosis, for example, breast cancer screening. And so I think we as the NHS could be better at highlighting specific areas and saying, well, these are the kind of AI tools we want. And I think as we look at where AI is going to be most value, I think there's an intersect of 3 areas we want to look at. It's the unmet need, it's what the technology is good at this moment in time, not what it might be in the future, but what it's good at now. And then what is the system ready for? And if you think of those as 3 separate circles, we could be much better and we would get far more products coming through with less wastage if we were saying, okay, where is that value intersect between the definite need? So this is something I would use in practice, overlapping with this is something AI is good for, and overlapping with the system. If we built this, the system is ready for it. Because again, a lot of AI solutions are sort of built in a silo, and people come to us saying, look, we've built this great AI solution, and we go, that's very nice. If that was the only thing I needed a digital solution for, but where does that plug into the rest of this complex system, my electronic health record, and the blood result systems and everything else that plugs into how we deliver care to patients?
So the shorter term, we've got trying to properly gauge the value of an AI system. That's an issue.
Yeah.
But for long term, for AI in the NHS, potentially there's an issue with how these systems are updated. I don't know how realistic it is, but I think there's been a lot of excitement recently around super intelligence, and I don't know if you've had a lot of interaction with that. And super agents, and it's kind of a hyperbolic term, but basically describing an agent that could be smarter than the brightest minds on earth. And sort of adjacent to that concept is self-evolving AI, and AI that basically identifies its own issues and then updates itself in order to avoid those issues, essentially. Do you think that we're going to get to a place where actually no one is interacting with these AI systems at all? No one's servicing them. They are just updating by themselves. They are recognizing their own issues. And perhaps there's someone on hand to service it and check it through. But because they know that it's self-evolving, how rigorously are they going to check the system? Do you see a future where that's happening?
Yeah, wow. So I'm going to try and stay in my lane in terms of I'm not the right person to comment on sort of artificial general intelligence and the kind of wider, really interesting and potentially frightening philosophical issues around that. But there is a direct relevance to what you say to what we're seeing coming through now, even in health. So if I try and take some of the different parts of that question apart, is there a role for AI in healthcare that could benefit from some of the features we're seeing in more advanced AI elsewhere, such as sort of self-improving, identifying its own issues, failures, updating accordingly, etc.? Yes, I do. Do I think there are safety issues around that? I don't think there is a sort of existential risk in terms of that suddenly then becoming a super intelligence diagnostic and self-aware. No. But I do think the more that a technology is changing in that post-market phase, i.e. they've been to a regulator, they've presented their kind of evidence of safety, they've been signed off, and then they're now out in the real world. Obviously, if that product is changing significantly, then that kind of assurance from a regulator is based on a previous version. So how do we manage that? So there's a lot of work going into that space saying, look, we don't want to lock down these technologies completely, because actually we want to continue to iterate them and have the best version for the best patient care. But how do we manage that safely? And that's an ongoing issue. I think you've come across this concept of predetermined change control plans. It's a bit of a mouthful, or PCCPs for short. This is just quite a neat idea from some of the regulators like FDA in the US, MHRA in the UK, and Health Canada in Canada, obviously, who have described this process whereby when I, as a manufacturer, come to you, the regulator, saying, look, look at our clever AI diagnostic, I can also say, all right, this is the work we've done so far. This is what it looks like now. These are the changes we are anticipating wanting to make in terms of updates. Please give us advance permission to make changes within these parameters. And providing you stay within those parameters, you don't have to come back to the regulator to seek new permission. But if you need to go beyond those, or for example, if you wanted to say, well, we originally designed it for this purpose, but we found it's quite good in this other purpose, and we want to change that intended use or intended purpose of the device, then you obviously do need to come back to the regulator. So I'm very supportive of the idea that we will be allowing AI technologies to continue to update and improve, and not necessarily needing to have to kind of go back to the drawing board each time. But there does need to be a mechanism by which we and the public can be assured that whatever version they are experiencing is a safe version. So I think this is super interesting. This is not something that, again, that the regulators have had to face before. It's happening very fast. It's lots of challenges, and we need to learn. And there's something else there that you also sort of point to, which is around the human role. And again, we're still learning this, is that we talk a lot about having a human in the loop, and when is it appropriate for that human to step back and talk about autonomous AI systems. And there is an issue that even when you have a human in the loop, actually 99.9% of that time, the technology is working fine. How meaningful is it? We find it very reassuring to say, well, there's a human there ready to take over any time. But if that human is kind of basically not paying attention because it's a bit boring and it's the computer always gets it right, then actually how meaningful is that rescue human in the loop? And again, that's something we need to think about. Okay, how do we provide those assurances, but also make sure that it's meaningful, it's not just tokenistic?
Kind of similarly, the Lancet Digital Health published a study yesterday. I don't think it was surprising, the results, but nonetheless, it did raise some red flags because they basically found that, when doctors are using either generative AI, kind of leaning on it as their primary resource, or they're just using it as a checking system, they are seen as, I'm going to say the term lower valued, but that's not the term that they use in the study. They are seen as sort of less clinically useful by both their peers and by patients, which it does make sense, but it does really solidify that this might be an issue, that as we implement AI tools, humans are needed less and less, and even if they are needed, perhaps then their value kind of decreases in the minds of not just patients, but peers alike. There's kind of less of a question to ask there, but I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, and if that problem can be avoided at all.
Again, as often, one of the first things is to understand and explore the problem itself. And one of the things I think there is an opportunity is how we think about our role as a human in the loop there. So am I as the human just tokenistic? I need to be there, and frankly, I could just be, reading the newspaper or on my phone or whatever, and I don't need to pay attention. Or actually, am I there as a supervisor? And, we think of a supervisor as a senior valued position. So if I think of myself as I'm running a big team, a very, very busy, very high quality team, but I'm in charge, and my role is to check when there is a problem, then actually that can feel quite a valued role. Now, it happens in this case that my team is full of AI bots, for example, but I should still feel value in that. If I feel that I'm just there because either legally they have to have a human there or some other tokenistic role, then I am going to feel devalued. But I think that also then makes a difference to how we communicate that to our patients, etc.
Yeah, it's a challenging concept. I want to go back to, sort of already touched on it, but AI bias. Just because it is such a hot topic. The biggest strategy for solving AI bias at the moment is to acquire as much data as possible and therefore climatize the system to every type of person under the sun.
Okay.
That's like the gold standard if you want to completely wean out bias, I reckon. But to do that needs an extortionate amount of time and data, and that's not often feasible. How are we going to balance efficiency with high quality training data sets to make sure that AI is performing tip top? Buddy?
Yeah, there's a trade-off there. You do want a high level, you want a decent sized data set, and you want high level of diversity in the data set. Having a really big data set where you've just amplified it by increasing like lots more of the majority population is not really going to help you. So what I worry about more is the kind of more minority populations and how well they are represented within that data set of whatever size it is, and how that matches to the target population where you will then deploy that technology. I think one of the interesting things is if we don't want to make the bar so high, even though it's really well intentioned, so high that people just go, well, it's too hard to build an AI technology that would pass the bar, so we're not going to bother. Or even alternatively, it's only possible for the absolute sort of megalithic companies. So then one of the things that I'm interested in is what is sufficient to have enough confidence that we can bring it to market, and I use that phrase because it would apply anywhere in the world, and in the UK context into our NHS. What can we bring those technologies through earlier so that patients can benefit from them, but to benefit safely by making sure that they're, unlike other technologies we bring through, there is a bit more of a safety net. And the relevance to your question then is, once we're doing that, effectively we're gathering the data on the very population, the very group of patients that we want to be looking after. So we're getting the answer that we need, which is, does it work for the UK population? And does it work for this patient who I'm trying to help in front of me? And so I think there's something really interesting here is how can we get sort of effectively almost real-time feedback and learning as we're going in a way that we've not really been used to doing for other types of technology.
Sure. Let's zoom out though, because what responsibility should the UK have to ensure that by getting our technology out there as quickly as we can, sure, the UK as a whole, maybe our health outcomes improve because we're finding cancers, for example, more quickly, and we're able to help more people in the UK. But as we improve, other countries with fewer resources, they don't have the same access to that technology, and their health outcomes don't improve as quickly, and we're just kind of making the health inequity gap worse. So what responsibility should we have?
So there's a big question there. I think the first thing to say around that is that improving the health of people in the UK is a good thing in its own right, and won't make, just doing that won't actually cause anybody else to be worse off. And the innovations, and then if we think, okay, well, what's the potential good impact on the rest of the world? Well, it's the fact that if any country, whether the UK or others, is bringing more technologies through, and they're getting that evidence that says, this is a useful product and that's safe in patients, then that's a benefit for anyone in the world where those countries now could potentially buy that technology and bring that in. I think there is a specific challenge with AI though, which is that if the only countries that develop these technologies are those which are in high income settings and which only have certain types of population, whether by ethnicity particularly, then the likelihood of those technologies being able to lift and drop or copy and paste into another environment is much less. So we find that even within the UK, moving from one part to another, but even say, we develop a diabetic retinopathy diagnostic test in London, it's not going to suddenly work out of the box in Nairobi, for example. But the encouraging thing is actually with the democratization of AI, of certainly whether it's sort of general purpose or even more specific AI, many parts of the world are developing really fantastic AI models. So we tend to be a little bit kind of blinkered to what our media shows us. But actually, if you were going to other parts of the world, I think you'd be amazed at some of the kind of AI technologies being used at scale and coming through really fast from local entrepreneurs.
Yeah. And from this perspective, do you think perhaps a good strategy would be to have some kind of legal requirement that perhaps open source models become much more widely available, and that perhaps big companies have to have some kind of open source model available so that other countries in the world do have access and can train their own models, but without, if they don't have the infrastructure to develop the foundation model in the first place, at least they have some access to an open source model that they can then refine. Do you think that there's a place for that in the UK's kind of legislation?
I don't see that as being a legislative issue. I mean, that's again not really my department, but if I was to guess how I saw this playing out, I would be surprised to ever see that in legislation. But if you look at how you can influence kind of more open approaches and more sharing approaches, what we do see is the big funders, so they're kind of big charities, whether government funded or charity funders like Wellcome Trust or National Institute for Health Research in the UK. They put very strong requirements around open access to data, open access to models, etc. Now, there's lots of positives around that. One of the challenges is that you also want to provide an opportunity for people to create things that they can then turn into companies. Part of the continuing to have new technologies, whether it's an AI device or a new drug, etc., being available to our patients, is people actually do need to be able to build businesses around them that can allow them to continue to make them and distribute them to health providers and patients. There's a really difficult balance. So on the one hand, I absolutely agree with you, and I bang the drum for kind of better sharing. We want to make sure that anybody, wherever you are in the world, can benefit from the discoveries of humankind. And at the same time, there's always this risk of about demotivating people to do discovery if they can't see that they can make a career out of it and build a business.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a tension. And if you think about big tech level, they do make a lot of these models. They have a kind of free access version, don't they?
Yeah.
And then a more premium version if you want to sort of build out on it. So I don't know where we'll land, but I think those that provide the funding for this to happen, which can make a big difference, even without, in terms of the stipulations they set, even without it being a legal requirement.
Let's finish by asking you, what are you currently working on? Is that a really difficult question?
No,
You've got so many different things.
So
Regulatory Horizons Council, perhaps?
Yeah, so I'm doing a lot of work with the UK's medical device regulator, the MHRA, looking at what the regulatory system of the future might look like. So in one sense, there's a job to do around helping innovators navigate the existing regulatory system, and I'm really committed to trying to help them bring technologies through that will benefit patients and improve the way we deliver healthcare as quickly as possible. We want that system to be as efficient as possible. But I'm also really interested in what does the regulatory system of the future look like. And that's not because I'm interested in regulation just for the sake of it. It's that I want this whole, the creative brilliance of people working in this area. I want to be able to see that coming through to benefit patients, and for us to just do, be faster at diagnosis, more reliable at diagnosis, being able to have patients to have these technologies that actually work for them. They're much more kind of user-centered design, being able to kind of benefit from AI technologies just in the home seamlessly as part of life. And if we're going to see that happen and see these being more personalized, etc., the current regulatory system won't work. So I'm really interested in how can we bit by bit construct that regulatory system of the future.
How do you break down the components of what you actually need in order to make the regulatory system a bit more suited for that future?
Yeah, so I think there's lots of layers to that question. I think you can take a technology by technology approach, which is like different types of AI technology, trying to work out what good looks like for each of those. You can take more a kind of regulatory system approach, which is, okay, you've got your law, and that's the slowest moving sort of layer. Then you've got standards, which is essentially, well, okay, how do you comply with the law? We'll give you almost like a checklist of things that you have to tick off. And then you've got guidance, which is generally the fastest moving layer. So that's almost like how, best practice, how you interpret and achieve what good looks like. So I think if you think of those different sort of constructs of how we think about regulation, I think we need to be both looking at the technologies that we have now that we're be more efficient about assessing safety on, and you can think about what the technologies are coming downstream. You mentioned agents, AI agents. That's going to be a big challenge, and we need to be thinking about that now. And you can be thinking about what tools we have for managing that regulatory process. But I think the problem about the word regulation is you immediately go, well, that's a big box over here. But if you think about how do we ensure that these technologies are safe and work for everybody, then that's probably a better question for us to be asking. And then regulation is a key part of how we achieve that. But the really fundamental question we're asking is, how do we get good technologies that benefit patients through faster and ensure they're safe and they work for everybody?
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you.